Hello and welcome to another episode of A Conversation with Carl. Remember to follow, like, and subscribe for the latest content. Today, I am honored to host Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. Rabbi Potasnik is the Executive Vice President of the New York Board of Rabbis, the world's largest interdenominational rabbinic body. He's also Rabbi Emeritus at Congregation Mount Sinai in Brooklyn Heights and serves as the FDNY chaplain, where he still assists surviving family members of first responders lost on 9/11. Welcome, Rabbi Potasnik, to the conversation.
Carl, it's always good to be with you, whether in person or in podcast or however we define this, but I value our friendship.
No, thank you so much for doing this. My question I will start with, it's an unfortunate place that we need to start the conversation here, but there's been an alarming and dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, particularly since October 7th. Are you concerned about the future of the Jewish diaspora?
I'm concerned in many ways. Firstly, I'm concerned about our physical safety. When I was growing up, and I'm sure this is true for you, Carl, we didn't see police vehicles in front of houses of worship. I always thought that sacred space was safe space, and that's how it was growing up. But then it took a change, and even before October 7th, you walk by a synagogue, a church, a mosque, and you'll see security there. You'll go inside, you'll see security there. I know in many cases there are armed individuals protecting congregants. Who would have thought that going to pray would become a question of safety? But that's where we are. So October 7th seemed to have exacerbated the situation with more incidents being reported. But even before that, we've never found the cure. The research that's ever found the cure for anti-Semitism. You know, Cardinal Dolan would often remind me that anti-Semitism is anti-Christianity, is anti-Islam, and you can reverse that equation any way you want. It's an affront against all of our faiths. But unfortunately, Jews seem to be in the forefront of the numbers. So we're in a bad place. I was just reading the other day, the chief of police in West Bloomfield, Michigan, who's involved in the investigation of what happened at Temple Israel, where a car rammed, the doors went in, started to destroy, and he's getting death threats. He's getting all kinds of harassing messages. He's not even Jewish. And, you know, you're a sellout and all this, you're with the Jews. So I don't want to hear, oh, it's all about Israel. It's about the Jews. As you know, social media is a blessing and a curse. There's no accountability. You can say whatever you want. You can say some of the most heinous things, completely diminish the worth of another human being and get away with it. I remember a few years ago, Elie Wiesel said one of the reasons for the Holocaust was you could get away with it. Now online, get away with anything you want, and you can refute it, but once you've made the statement, it's there. You know, after the slaughter at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the rabbi asked this: when we said never again, did we put a question mark after that or an exclamation mark after that? And I got to tell you, with all the reporting we see, with all the stories, the numbers growing precipitously, I think a question mark would be put there.
Let's change topics and talk about Mayor Mandami, because this is something that a lot of people, Jewish people in America, even if you live in New York City or you don't live in New York City, you're still talking about him. And people are very concerned about his views on Israel. And, you know, he suggests that Israel has a right to exist, but not as a Jewish state. Have you spoken to the mayor?
I have spoken with him a few times. Few meaning 3. And each time I've emphasized the need to have a constructive relationship with the Jewish community. It's very uninspiring, and you know, you can't convince people that if you inflame the atmosphere that you're going to keep the Jews safe. You know, it's like someone who's an arsonist says, don't worry, I'll call the fire department. So I told them that let's have a moratorium on the Middle East. We don't need to discuss the Middle East all the time or any of the time, or maybe occasionally. But when it seems to be there's a consistency of comments he's made, of comments his wife has posted publicly, not privately. So we have real concerns. You know, we have an Israel Day parade coming up, Carl. And the question is, well, if he says that Israel is not entitled to a Jewish state, then is he going to march in the parade? And I think the answer is no, he won't. I don't think he can, given his views. So for the first time in the history of New York, as I remember, I had to go back to Peter Stuyvesant when this was called New Amsterdam. But to think that you could win an election and have this kind of anti-Israel view, is something hard
Yeah.
to absorb. Yeah, we are concerned. Look, we can have disagreements. We all disagree. Someone said that the Jewish star is the most fitting symbol for the Jewish people because you have two triangles going in opposite directions. Because we know what it is to disagree with one another. But at least the Jewish star is on one flag. But to have this kind of relationship that is efficient in having the kind of opportunity to talk to each other and disagree civilly, we don't have that. We just talk at each other or about each other, but not really much with each other. It's a genuine worry. We have
So
enough to
how
about.
do we change that? If you're in one bubble or the other bubble, you're not talking to each other, and you can't hate half America.
So I remember so many times I hear a president of a country say, "I was elected president of all the people. I may not have been elected by all the people who didn't vote for me, but I am now elected. I'm the president of all the people." The mayor has said, I am the mayor of all of New York. And I think it's incumbent upon him to sit down and have meaningful engagement with those who disagree. It's very easy to sit with those, who have the same point of view. That's no challenge. But when you're a leader, you have to be able to spend that necessary time with people who strongly disagree with your point of view. Because at the end of the day, your responsibility is to protect them. So I've said that to him. I've also said I think it would be right for the mayor to visit Jewish college students on campuses to hear their stories, but above all, to see that there is a mainstream Jewish community with who there isn't this kind of necessary relationship or engagement. So, yeah, we've spoken. And by the way, I'm a firm believer of being in the room, being at the table, and having discussions. I was designated to serve on the transition committee, part of because of my FDNY relationship. But people said to me, "Why would you want to serve?" I said, "Because I've been outside many places over the years protesting. When you're in the room, I'd rather protest face to face and be able to say and be able to listen, because that's where you can try to effectuate change or mitigate damage." So I'll continue to do that. And I look forward to having, that kind of sit down, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's a few others. We had the board of rabbis met with him. Our officers met with him one time. And people were very strong in their views, and he listened. But we know his view. Question is, how do you have a city with opposing views and still have a very respectful relationship? So
New York has always been a safe haven for Jews. Do you still believe that that's true?
it's hard to believe that when you see Jews getting attacked who are outwardly Jewish. You wear a Star of David, you have a kippah, you look Jewish to some people, you're a potential target. Look at the hate numbers. Look at the percentages, how much it's increased. So how does one feel safe when the numbers are rising all the time, when people don't feel safe? You can even tell me the numbers are better. I'm not going to feel safe while I think the climate is still very, very challenging for Jewish people. And by the way, we have a wonderful relationship in New York with members of different faith communities. Where there's an attack on Jews, we all stand together. I remember many times being in front of a mosque, being in front of a church, and saying that an attack on them is an attack on us, and vice versa. Christians, Muslims have stood with us. But obviously that message doesn't convince those who hate us.
So how do we change this? Because I think this is a fear everyone has right now in the Jewish community.
We're going to sit at the Seder table and say in every generation, there are those who seek to destroy us. And I think this year, when we say it, we're going to feel it even stronger. I think we have to keep pushing back. I think Jews have to recognize, and I think we do, we can't fight anti-Semitism alone, Carl. We
Yeah.
need a strong interfaith involvement. I've said this to the cardinal and to the archbishop. People need to see us together. I also think we have to try as best we can on campuses to get students talking to each other. We all live in these separate silos very often. We all don't want to engage in a very, very difficult conversation with people who disagree. I think we have to do that. But we need leaders who set a tone. I think the mayor has to sit down with people, Jewish community and others, but right now it impacts the Jewish community primarily, has to sit down and say, hey, I can have a different point of view, but I'm going to do whatever I can to lower the temperature, to speak out before it happens, not after it happens. We as faith leaders, we have to do as much as possible to bridge the gap, to bridge the divide, and see each other as members of one family. We say it, but we need to see it more. And we need to get our young people talking to each other because a lot of these hate crimes are perpetrated by young people.
Do you think Mayor Mandami is committed to protecting the Jewish community,
Well,
including those who identify as Zionists?
you know, to the hate monger, they don't make distinctions. They're, again, the people who attack synagogues attack them because they're Jews. I remember, a number of times where there've been attacks on synagogues, and, they don't know. First of all, they don't look at the label, Reform Synagogue, Conservative, Orthodox. But beyond that, not everybody agrees on all of the elements of Zionism. We have disagreements. But one thing all the hate mongers agree on, that we're Jews. And
Yeah.
I'm not ready to accept you know, a truncated or a different point of view. I'm a Zionist. I'm a Jew. I see them going hand in hand. That doesn't mean we can't have difference of thoughts when it comes to policies, but we have difference of thoughts when it comes to, American policies. We're still Americans, but we can be Jews as well. You walk into synagogues, you see an Israeli flag, an American flag. They go hand in hand, in our view. I think the mayor, again, we have to, and I'm hoping to have some impact, needs to really surround himself in a meeting of people who have a different view. It's very easy when everybody eats the same thing on the menu and everybody likes the same music. But when people differ, if you can do that, that makes you a very effective leader.
You touched on this a little bit ago about the Israel Day Parade. How do you think that goes this year?
I think many of us who've gone before will make sure we bring others more. We need a large turnout. I was talking to a Protestant minister, and I said, I want you to come, because he occasionally has come to the parade. I said, you have to come this year. We need to have strong visibility. We need to be vocal. This is our parade, not just the Jewish parade. And when Jews are under attack, we need people to see non-Jews standing with us. So I'm hoping we have a huge turnout. I don't know what we do with the mayoral position and the parade. I don't see how does he march in a parade when he doesn't believe in the right of Jews? What happens to Jewish Heritage Night? I think these are issues that we need to address with one another. Look, I've had some very fine conversations. He calls me a friend, but I'm also a friend who's not afraid to challenge. So I think we all have a responsibility. Remember that movie, King's Speech? King George VI, his famous line is, I have a voice. And in Hebrew, the word for kehilah, which means community, has the word kol in it, which means voice. When you are a proud member of a community, you have to exercise your voice. So we have to use that ability. And thankfully, we live in a country where we have freedom of speech. This buffer bill controversy, and I've been somewhat involved. We're not looking to stifle free speech on the other side. We've all been protesters. Who hasn't protested against the UN at one time or another? Who hasn't stood against the Russian mission at one time or another? We know what a buffer zone is. We've been in buffer zones. So we're not looking to stop free speech. We're just looking to separate those who say horrendous things to people walking into houses of worship. Keep them away a little bit, keep them back a little bit, 2020, whatever the police decide. That to me is not in any way a removal of the right of free speech. So
you shouldn't be shamed going into a synagogue.
You shouldn't be shamed. And Carl, you asked me before, do you feel safe? Imagine, look what happened at Park East Synagogue, what happened in Kew Gardens, and of course other places in the country where Jews were attacked. The fact that you have to look around, in Europe, you walk by Jewish synagogues, you see police, always police. You have to show you a passport. In America, we always thought, no, this is different. And New York, oh my God, this is like a Jewish capital here, of the second largest Jewish community in the world. And yet, look at what we have to endure. Going into a house of worship. Who would have thought it? It's always inscribed, love your neighbor on the entrance. It's just so wrong, so wrong. By the way, Park East Synagogue, where we're going to have a gathering, hopefully to celebrate the passage of the buffer zone bill. That was the place where Jews were called heinous names as they walked to the synagogue. The rabbi of the synagogue, who's 95 or 96, is a Holocaust survivor who witnessed the burning of his synagogue in Vienna years ago. Can you imagine? You survived that. You saw your shul being burned because of hatred, and now you're in America after all these years, and you're seeing people being verbally attacked as they walk into your shul. It's hard to accept.
It's very hard to accept. Let's change gears for a second. When did you decide to become a rabbi? Let's make this a little lighter.
Yeah, well, I tried. But, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and my parents lost their children of the first marriage during the Holocaust. So I'm the product of their second marriage after the Holocaust. When I grew up, I used to see pictures of these kids on, one of the shelves in the house. And my folks didn't tell me at first who they were, but reluctantly, they mentioned to me those were their kids. So I looked at those pictures and I said, I'm a survivor. They didn't survive. I have a responsibility to them. I have to do what I can to perpetuate their memory. There's a famous question in Jewish tradition. Two people stranded in the desert, one canteen of water. If one drinks, one survives. If both drink, both will die. There's only enough water for one. Who drinks from the canteen? And the answer, after much discussion, is the one who owns the canteen. You have a right to preserve your life. And Elie Wiesel said, if you're lucky enough to drink from the canteen, you have that responsibility to the person who couldn't drink from the canteen to keep his memory alive. That inspired me to go into the rabbinate, to keep Judaism alive, to keep the memories of those who couldn't celebrate the fact that they would choose, do it in a meaningful way. Although my mother wanted me to be a doctor, as in keeping with a tradition of many Jewish moms. As a matter of fact, she would call me every Wednesday and say, if you listen to me, you wouldn't be working together, because historically, Wednesday was the day off for doctors. But I love what I do. Somebody said, I don't care what kind of Jew you are, be proud of the Jew you are. I believe in proud Judaism. The denomination is secondary. It's not even secondary. It doesn't matter. Practice whatever Judaism is meaningful for you, and hopefully you bring pride to yourself and to your people.
Will you tell us about the New York Board of Rabbis?
Sure. I'm sitting in the office here, and I have to tell you that we are the largest, as you said before, interdenominational rabbinic body in the world, which means we have rabbis of all the different denominations who can sit together, talk about constructive dialogue, different points of view, different approaches. But we can sit together and say, we can look at each other and listen to each other and learn from each other. I'd like to bring that spirit out there into our society more. This dislike of the unlike has reached its dangerous proportion, dangerous statistic. The minute I don't like the other, whoever the other is, I have a right to diminish that person in any way. And I found over the years that when the hatred starts in the heart, eventually it metastasizes to the hands when we see the attacks on people. So the ability to believe and disbelieve, the ability to agree and disagree, we have to make that more fundamental to our lives.
And as a leader, you have seen the Jewish community change in demographics, religious levels over the years. What does it look like today?
I remember years ago when many of us who went to synagogue on Shabbat, on holidays, we went with our parents. We did things that they did. We had seders because they had seders. We were kosher because they were kosher. I think that mentality has changed over the years. A number of young people, we call them the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, where there are nuns who are just disconnected. The parents may be disconnected or living in a secular society. There are other things that they're much more satisfying, much more enjoyable than going to services or keeping that regimen that we have in Jewish life. So we're losing people in the certain circles. I think in some areas we're growing. You see the growth of Chabad. You see the growth in other areas of the Orthodox world, some conservative, some reform, but not enough. But I guess the price you pay for freedom in America is, when people are oppressing you all the time, you come closer. But when you live in a free society, you can do things that you couldn't do in the shtetl or in the ghetto. So that is a challenge we face. And one of the sad things, Carl, is when we see young people who are disconnected from Jewish life, from the state of Israel, and then sometimes our adversaries. They vote against our interest. They march against our interest. They're so-called on the other side. But we have to engage them. We can't write them. We are 1/10 of 1% of the world's population. We can't afford to write Jews off. So that's why I'm saying we got to do a better job in reaching out and saying, look, you can hold that point of view, but hold it while you talk to me, not while you out there marching against me.
I would say New York City is the Jewish capital in the United States.
Well, you're not the first, Carl. The Pope said that. It was Pope Francis who said that years ago.
And
Yeah.
do you think that's going to be a hold in the future?
Carl, that is a great question, because I do know people who are leaving New York. Everybody says, I don't know anybody. I know people who are leaving New York. I know people who are saying, this is not that golden paradise that my parents told me about that I lived in years ago. It's changing. For me, look, I'm from Boston. So I always thought I'd go back to Boston, but I love the city. I think New York for Jews is a very special place. There's a kosher restaurant, the Yiddish theater, whatever it is. I've always felt you could be a comfortable Jew in New York. It's easy to do in New York. That has become a question mark. Can you be comfortable being Jewish in New York? And when you see all the hate attacks, you begin to think twice, especially if you have kids. But let me tell you, Cardinal Dolan, a great story. A woman came over to him, Catholic, wearing a prominent crucifix. And she said, I live in a building with a Jewish woman who's religious. And I went over to her one day and said, our kids go to school near each other. My son goes to a Catholic parochial school. Your son goes to yeshiva. Let's walk together. Let's walk together. And I think you'll feel safer. And he says, that's what we need. We need more walking together with our allies. We have enough adversaries. We need to walk with allies.
Yeah. And
we need to be role models for our kids. I saw my father, he loved Judaism. Who would have thought that someone who lost family that way, and my mother, they were so happy to be Jews. They would join, we grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts. They joined a few synagogues simultaneously, because they said we couldn't be part of a synagogue during the Holocaust. We want to make sure we're part of synagogues here in America. So the joy of Judaism, that has to be the message going out there. The pain of Jewish life is not going to create more Jews. The joy of Jewish life resonates much more.
We're talking about Elie Wiesel, and one of Elie Wiesel's quotes that I always like is someone asked him how can he be religious when God did this to him, and he said, if I blame God, then I take man out of the equation, and man did this to me, not God.
Vigiano Sr., who was a retired firefighter, lost two kids on 9/11. One son was a firefighter, one son was a cop. And I knew John, I got to know him because, I now serve as chief chaplain for FDNY. And I said, John, you still believe in God? He said, Rabbi, God didn't kill my kids. Terrorists killed my kids. He would go to houses of worship and speak about the need to stay strong with your tradition. He would go to Walter Reed Hospital. He would travel to see troops around the world. He would say, we need to stay strong together. And he would inspire them. So, again, positive Judaism. I know we have Holocaust museums, and I believe in Holocaust museums, but being anti-Semitism doesn't always translate into positive Judaism. We need to have more. People have to know the story of the Holocaust. They have to know why the hatred, what can we do to combat it. But they also have to join because there's a positive kind of attraction here. This gives me meaning. Look at the Passover Seder. We eat the maror, but we also have the roasted. We know what the bitterness tastes like, but we also know the sweetness. So Jewish life can't just be what they call the lachrymose history of Jewish life. It's not all about sorrow. It's about celebration as well.
But life is a mixture of both, right?
So when I first became a rabbi, there was a woman congregation who sent me a box of chocolates, bittersweet chocolate. When I saw it, I said, it's interesting, bittersweet. She said, I sent you a message. Life is not all sweet, and it's not all bitter. It's bittersweet. But you have to be ready. You can't walk away when it's bitter, and you can't take sweetness for granted. We have to work assiduously to promote a brand of Judaism where young people say, that has meaning for me. I mentioned the Cardinal. He once said, nobody wants to walk into a church and hear a grumpy old guy who's just criticizing and complaining all the time. But we want positive messages. Look at Chabad. Look at the happiness, the joy of being Jewish. The celebratory spirit. We have to emulate that.
They're dancing all around the city, always.
They're standing there on, Friday afternoon, stopping people. Are you Jewish? And they're not ashamed of who they are. They stand up, for their tradition. And we need to be part of that infusion of proud Judaism. We need that.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Carl, the fact that you and I, two Jews, proud Jews, can sit and talk to each other, not be afraid of, how is someone going to look at this? What's the commentary going to be on this? We're still a free people. We have to be thankful for what we have. My father came to this country and became a citizen, naturalized citizen. He used to carry his citizenship paper in his breast pocket. He was a Brahmin American. This is a great country. Flaws with scars, but I read about the Orient where the weavers of a rug are told if they make a mistake in the design, you can't remove it. You have to integrate it into the pattern. So we take the scars, we take the scratches, but we still have a face and we still can design a life that is meaningful. So the word nevertheless is the word I would conclude with. Whatever we have to face, nevertheless, we're going to do it as members of a proud people who have done so much for others. We also have to do for ourselves.
Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you out there for listening. And as always, let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments. And until next time, everyone, be safe.